So once upon a time, the ethereal ninja master Two Sounds leapt up into the air, spun around in midair, and found himself facing the enormous, gelatinous, oozing green monster of envy. And with one finger straight into his mouth, he erupted his sonic pop. As soon as his face faced the face of the green gelatinous monster, he goes, and the powerful pop erupted the monster's eyes, and two perfect emerald eyes shattered and fell to the ground, and the monster was defeated and it splashed to the ground, and there was a huge rushing wave of goo which flowed in every direction. And Two Sounds awoke, and all of the rest of the circle of ninja masters awoke, and they faced each other and they bowed and they went their separate ways. You see, Two Sounds was part of a very elite group of ninjas who gathered together, usually about 4 times a year, to go into the ethereal realms to combat the fiercest foes ever known to humankind. It's about 4 times a year, the forces of greed, of hatred, of closed-mindedness, of avarice, all of these huge forces would come upon the people, and these ninja masters would gather. And they would go deep into a meditative state. And they would gather and they would confront these enormous monsters. And together, they were powerful enough to keep the world in balance. And they all represented different schools of martial arts. They all had their own secret, powerful, special moves. There was the master of the flaming pinky, which you didn't ever want to have to see, because by the time you saw it, it was too late. And there were 7 other masters, and they gathered, and they could maintain the peace for quite some time, until this one day. Until this one day, the sound was sounded, and they gathered together, and they went deep into their meditative state, and they all meditated super hard, and all of a sudden they all fell backwards at the exact same time, and they were there, erupted into the ethereal realms, and they faced this enormous monster, but it was like gaseous. You could barely see 2 eyes, but the rest of it was this yellow haze. And they all tried their special moves, and even Two Sounds tried his special pop, and nothing worked. Nothing would even touch it. And they realized that this new monster that they couldn't take down, this new monster was the power of apathy, of boredom, of complacence. And so they came back out of their meditative state, and they went to see their master, the master of all of the masters, and they said, "Master, what are we going to do? We have no idea how to defeat this new foe." And so he left, went into his own cave state, and he went into his meditative state. He usually played Tetris on a handheld. It was his way, and it got him into his meditative state. And so he played a little Tetris, and he had his answer. And he came back to the circle of master ninjas, and he came into them, and he said, "Handicrafts." And they all looked at him, and they said, "Handicrafts?" See, none of these ninjas had any time for hobbies. None of them had cultivated much of anything as far as outside interests. So deeply had they committed themselves to their path, to their tract. That was all they did, all they thought about. And they were the best of the best of the best of the best. But they had no time for these other endeavors. And so he said, "Go back to your hometowns and come back with a handicraft." And so they all went back, and Two Sounds went to the village that he grew up in. And he knew his grandmother and his mother, they were really big knitters. And so he figured, well, whatever, it's got to be pretty easy. And so he went and sat in front of his grandmother, and she gave him these 2 sticks and along one single piece of yarn. And he started trying to knit and started trying to cast on, and it was just the most frustrating thing. And with his super powerful ninja strength, he just shattered knitting needle after knitting needle. So frustrated was he. But then finally, he just sat, and he remembered the beginning of his trainings, and he tried to muster that kind of openness, that kind of mind. And he sat, and slowly, stitch after stitch, he slowly began to knit, and something new was born in him. See, he was so used to being the master of so many. He was so used to being the expert of experts that now, all of a sudden, learning anew, growing anew, something opened inside of him. And he decided he'd bring his grandmother back. And so when they sat in the circle the next time when they wanted to go try and defeat the yellow, powerful foe, they sat in their circle, but every single one of the master ninjas had brought their teachers. And so there was the inner circle of ninjas, and then there was an outer circle of knitters, of ceramicists, of those little stars that you make. Someone was really good at that, and one ninja got really into it. All of these different handicrafts were represented, and it was the most powerful thing, and they all went into meditation. They all fell back at the exact same time. And as soon as they woke up on the ethereal plane, they all stood around this vaporous monster of yellow. And with their circle, with the grandmothers and brilliant artisans behind them, the monster of yellow couldn't even exist in the heat of their glares, and so it just disappeared. And they woke back up out of their meditative state, and they were recommitted always to remember that openness, that beginner's mind, always to knit. And through that powerful force and connection, many intricate and beautiful sweaters, scarves, hats even, were made. Amen. I invite you to rise.